With our drone up in the air, we can easily capture stunning aerial imagery that would not be possible from the ground. You'll see on your controller that we have two shoulder buttons, one to start and stop video recording, and the other that acts as a shutter button for the stills camera. By default, your drone will be set in automatic mode that take all the worry of applying the correct settings out of your hands. To get the most out of your drone, however, we can control a variety of these settings ourselves that will affect your video and photos in different ways. We can access all of these settings in the DJI Go 4 app on our smart device, so let's dive in and take a look. Starting with frame rate, FPS or frames per second. These indicate how many still images or frames are recorded in each second of footage. These are then played back in sequence to create a moving image. With the UK standard frame rate for playback being issued at 25 frames per second. By using higher frame rates, it allows us to create smooth, slow motion footage in post-production. For example, if you want to slow your footage down by 50%, simply shoot at twice the standard frame rate, 50 frames per second. Some cameras allow you to shoot up to 120 frames per second, which can create some extreme slow motion effects. Resolution. This is the size of the image or video file in pixels. You'll be familiar with HD, 1920 by 1080, and 4K. In photography, this is measured in megapixels. The higher the resolution, the more detail will be in your video and photos. If you're editing on a HD timeline but shooting in 2.6 or 4K, you'll be able to reframe your shots and use multiple parts of the image throughout the video if necessary. Resolution doesn't always mean your image or video will be sharper. This all depends on how the camera's sensor works. Exposure refers to how much light is hitting the camera's sensor and determines how light or dark your image is. How well exposed your image is controlled by three settings collectively known as the exposure triangle. These are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. The aperture determines how wide the opening is behind your camera's lens and controls how much light is hitting the camera's sensor, which can play a big part in how the image looks and feels. Aperture is measured in f-stops, and the lower the f number, the more light is allowed to come into the camera. With higher the f number, the less amount of light is coming through. Shutter speed. In photography, shutter speed is the duration of time the sensor is exposed to light and can massively affect how movement is captured. A fast shutter speed will freeze your subject in time, whilst the slow shutter speed can be used creatively to show motion blur and light trails. For video, the general rule of thumb is that the shutter speed should be twice as fast as the frame rate. If you're shooting at 25 frames per second, set the shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. For video at 50 frames a second, set it to 1/100th. Having a correct shutter speed is very important if you want to shoot cinematic video. The use of ND filters will be needed on sunny days to block out the light from the sun and achieve the correct exposure. ISO refers to the sensitivity of the digital sensor. The higher the ISO number, the more sensitive it is to light, allowing shooting in low light conditions. The downside of increasing your ISO is that the higher the number, the grainier your final image will be. If you don't feel confident to manually control the exposure of the image at this stage, the auto settings do a great job. Many pilots will set the drone to automatically analyse the light available and adjust the settings accordingly. We can fine-tune this by using the exposure compensation setting, which will increase or decrease how light our image is. Although manual settings are encouraged to have total control over the image and final output, auto settings can be useful in changing weather conditions and brightnesses to ensure you capture a usable shot every time. Moving on to colour profiles and raw photos. Some editors prefer a flat image or a video file to edit with. This gives them more freedom to colour correct and grade the image. You will see some drones offer normal mode, which is a straight out the box contrasty look which can be delivered straight to your client. You will also find D-Log and D-Cine-like, which give more flexibility in post-production. These latter profiles have a slightly different gamma curve and lack any contrast or saturation straight out of the camera. Using a less contrasty profile gives us more dynamic range. This gives us more flexibility and data in both the highlights and the shadows in post-production. If you're comfortable with colour grading your footage, it's always best to use one of these profiles. Moving on to raw photos. Raw photos preserve more data in the image file, meaning just like D-Log versus normal, you have more to work with in the edit than just shooting a compressed file type like JPEG. RAW files, however, are much larger than JPEG, so be sure you have enough space on your microSD card before taking to the air. Codecs and bitrate. A codec is basically the file type which your camera will encode or decode in order to play the file back on your computer. The bitrate refers to the depth of information stored in the video file. This is essentially the compression of the video file and plays a part in how easy it is to edit on your computer as well. The higher the bitrate, the higher the quality of video, but it also means the file size will be much larger and your computer may find it harder to edit. Focus. On the DJI Mavic 2 Pro drones, it's very easy to set your focus. Assign the focus control to C1 or C2, so the focus can easily be reset to the current location of the focus rectangle. Half press the shutter button to focus the camera, or simply tap on the screen to tell the camera where to focus. If you enable autofocus continuous mode, it will autofocus when the object or the drone stops momentarily. Now you know all you need to get out and shoot high quality aerial video and photography.